Thank you, Kriton. So I'm going to be actually picking up on some of the themes that my colleagues have touched upon, and specifically looking at large body-sized animals and the importance of actually parks in protecting those large body-sized animals, focusing especially on species like tigers, elephants, rhinos, and the like. But I think actually the lessons are probably generally applicable, but they are, we have the data for large-bodied species in a much more systematic way. So if we look at elephants, and again, the core idea here is that parks are absolutely critical for protecting these species, not only because they're large body size, but in a lot of cases they also have high-value products. They are valuable to people. People hunt them. And if you look at elephants, what you see basically is from the 1800s through 1975, you have a dramatic collapse in the range of the elephant. In 1975, though, we see the African elephant both in protected areas and outside of protected areas. But by 2007, with some exceptions in southern Africa, by 2007, the African elephant is pretty much restricted to protected areas. And I'm going to focus a little bit on Central Africa. We have a set of protected areas in Central Africa, most of which have been established in the last 20 years or so. We also know that in Central Africa, we've had a dramatic decline over the last 10 years in the number of elephants. A study by Boumaizel's et al. Basically show that the African elephant has declined by about 60% in Central Africa in the last 10 years. Most of the remaining African elephant populations in this part of the world are in protected areas. And these show the protected areas. The upper figure here basically shows the encounter rate of African elephant dung in protected areas. What you can see is that the elephant populations in Congo and Gabon still remain relatively robust. However, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, many of those African elephant populations are already declining. And if you look at the lower right figure, that actually shows the presence of hunter signs in these same park areas. And there's an inverse correlation between the African elephant populations in parks and the presence of hunter sign in those same parks. This is another analysis of the same pattern, really looking at the distribution of African elephants between 2002 and 2011. As you can see, the elephant populations, again, in the western part of the basin, Congo and Gabon, are more robust. But basically what you're seeing really across the whole basin now is that the African elephant populations, where they remain, they are in parks and protected areas. And I should say that we're not just talking about parks. If you look at this analysis of where elephants are across Africa, it includes community protected areas, it includes conservancies, and all captured within the general rubric of protected areas. But the other strong predictor, if you look at what's happening within parks in Central Africa, is that the far left graph, if guards are present, if eco-guards are present, the abundance of elephants is higher. There is also a correlation between the abundance of elephants and the level of hunting intensity. And again, if you look at the relationship between hunting intensity and guards, again, you see an overall pattern. So if there are guards there, hunting intensity is down, and elephant populations are higher. So let me focus now on one landscape, the Enoki-Tlakula landscape in northern Congo. What you can see here is Nuabali-Ndoki, the national park in the center. There's really 3 national parks here. The rest of the surrounding land uses are mostly forest concessions. All of these forest concessions have a certain level of certification. Some of them are FSC certified. There is a strong effort within these forest concessions to manage wildlife, to protect the wildlife populations. Nevertheless, if you look at the overall patterns, and this is the park here, these are concessions around the edges. Again, you see this inverse relationship between the presence of elephant and the presence of hunter's sign. Where hunters are, elephants don't tend to be. And if you look at the dung density, which is a measure of elephant presence, between 2006 and 2010, here is the national park here. This is the only area within this large landscape where elephant populations have tended to go up. They've probably gone up mostly because elephants have probably gone into the park because it's safer within the park. The rest of this landscape the elephants are being protected, but not with the same level of intensity. And so what you see in all of these forest concessions around the national park is that elephant populations have declined between 2006 and 2010. Let me switch species. Let's look at tigers. We've had Vivek told us some about tigers. This is in the yellow is the historical range of tigers. The green is the present distribution of tigers. We've seen the same pattern with tigers, an overall collapse of the range of the tiger into parks and protected areas. If you look at these little green dots, these are the source sites where the elephant populations are relatively robust. About half of them are in India. You can see the distribution of them throughout the region. While we have tiger range in places like Cambodia and Laos and Vietnam, probably tigers for the most part have disappeared from those countries. If you look at these source sites, and 42 of these source sites have been identified, mostly again within parks and protected areas. They cover about 90,000 square kilometers. That is less than half of 1% of the historical range of tigers, and just 6% of the current tiger range. Within those 42 little nubbins, okay, those source sites contain about 2,200 tigers, which is about 70% of all the remaining tigers in the wild. And so you get a sense of how critically important these parks and protected areas are for protecting these species which have value to hunters. And again, in the case of tigers, as with elephants, we see that the biggest indicator of success is the presence of protection. And so in Hua Ka Keng in Thailand, we've got good longitudinal data. The smart patrolling system was set up in 2006. There was a heavy investment in protection. We know something about the presence of illegal activity between 2006 and to the present day, but this goes to 2008. One of the things which happened through this period was protection pushed the presence of poaching to the edges, and what you see here is a decline in overall hunting, and a slight possible resurgence in tiger populations, which has tended to go up. So if you look at parks and protected areas, they're absolutely necessary to protect this kind of wildlife from direct threats from things like hunting. They're also necessary to maintain habitat, food supply, and favorable ecological conditions, but they indeed are not sufficient. And ultimately, effective conservation is going to depend on operating at scale with, at its core, parks and protected areas. So going back to the elephant case, this is Enoki, again in northern Congo. This is movement of 4 elephants over a 3-month period. What you can see is that the elephants very rapidly move out of the protected areas into the forest concessions around, but their movements are much, much broader than even these large protected areas. And so species like this really do need us not only to protect them in the parks, but also in the larger landscape. This is just one of my favorite examples. These are wolverines. This is Yellowstone National Park. These little beasts move huge distances. This little corner here is the Yellowstone National Park. A collared wolverine crossed some 600 miles over the course of about a year, and still is moving. So a lot of these animals need very, very large areas. And getting back to tigers, this is the Malindon Mysore landscape in Karnataka in southwest India. These are the national parks within this area. This is where we thought most of the tigers are, and this is where most of the tigers are censused. The broader landscape, it's a forested landscape with a lot of cacao. You get a sense of what the landscape looks like here. It's very broken up. But if you actually look at the movements of animals, and we've been actually camera trapping through this whole landscape, you get cases like this with Tiger 241. Let me just back up here, just to be clear. Here's Bandipur down here, here's Badra here, here's Dandeli up here. Tiger 241 was first recorded in Bandipur in February 2010, then made straight line movements and ended up in Badra, which is halfway up that landscape. This other animal, 130, was photoed in Badra, ended up in Dandeli a year and a half later. So these animals are moving across this landscape, even though this is not a protected area landscape. This is a heavily populated landscape, but the tigers are moving and are not being seen. If you ask local people whether there are tigers in the area, they say no. But somehow they're turning up in one park after another, one protected area after another. So again, you just get the sense of the importance of the protected areas to protect these high-value species, and also the importance of the larger landscape matrix as well. So as we think about conservation, I think we have to think about the absolute critical necessity of these parks and protected areas, especially for these high-value species, but also we need to be thinking about them in the broader landscape. Thank you.